Should hate crimes be a felony or should they remain a misdemeanor? We're going to be talking about it this week's edition of Mitchell Talks, the News 9 Sessions. It's Mitchell Talks, minus the Mitchell. Aaron Brillback in for Scott Mitchell today. With me today, District Attorney for Pottawatomie County, Alan Grubb, and also Senator Ron Sharp of Shawnee, Republican. What we're talking about today is we had a pretty horrible incident in Shawnee. A couple of white gentlemen attacked apparently a couple of black gentlemen. The whole thing was caught on video. Let's take a look at it real quick. So watching that, guys, is extremely difficult. But what makes it even more difficult, what makes it rise to the level of a hate crime, is you're actually hearing racial slurs being shouted. And we blurred those out, obviously, but you can hear the racial slurs being shouted. Talk to me about that, Alan, as far as why that makes that a hate crime.
That goes to their intent. They intended to hurt this black man, and they did. They caused severe injuries. He was unconscious for 3 days. And now his family has to deal with rehabbing him back to where he can function in life. He was lured, I believe, into the area, and they intended to do what they did, and that's what makes it a hate crime. Along with the racial slurs go to prove their intent. The deal at the end where they yell, "White boys rule this town," as he's lying unconscious, almost dead on the ground, shows their intent. The legislation currently in Oklahoma, 21-850, OS 850, is an escalating offense. So it starts off as a misdemeanor the first time you commit a hate crime. I think that given the nature of that statute, DAs should have the discretion to make that a felony the first time if it's this serious of a deal where they almost killed a guy. That statute only gives me that remedy. I'm able to loop in some other felonies, but I wish I had the ability to make that actual crime fit. And as a DA, on most everything else, I have discretion to charge it misdemeanor or felony. On this type of case, I don't have that discretion.
And you're not overplaying this guy's injuries. I mean, he's seriously injured. He's got brain injuries that he still hasn't recovered from, still has a hard time recognizing people, still has a hard time with short-term memory, and we just don't know how long-term this is going to be. In fact, you put off filing these charges for a while to see how well he recovers, and so far that recovery is not there.
Right, the recovery's not there, and Oklahoma has a maiming charge for permanent massive physical injury. This may very well end up being that charge, but I don't know what the ramifications are of his long-term recovery. Right now, he has trouble with one eye, he has trouble speaking, he has trouble walking. Hopefully he heals, but this was a hate crime. We can prove it was a hate crime, and I wish we could charge that as a felony because that's what fits. And in Oklahoma, this hasn't been revisited in approximately 20 years, and it's probably time for our legislatures to revisit it.
And Ron, I was kind of surprised too to find out that this is a misdemeanor rather than a felony. On the federal level, it's a felony. On the state level, it's a misdemeanor. You've got some concerns, though, in terms of making this a felony from a misdemeanor. Talk to me about that.
Well, the people of Oklahoma have voted in State Question 780. Clearly, their intent with 780 is to move those crimes that were felonies, some down to misdemeanors. There is always a problem that you are going against the will of the people if you are now moving a crime that was a misdemeanor up to a felony. Now, in this particular case, are the people of Oklahoma supportive of making a hate crime with intimidation, and that is what the purpose of this attack upon these two individuals there in Shawnee. They not only wanted to assault and battery this young man in particular, but they also wanted to do so with serious intimidation. Mm-hmm. Is this worthy of being, upon first offense, a felony conviction? And that will be something of which I am serving on the Judiciary Committee, will be happy of which to present that to the Judiciary Committee on behalf of our District Attorney Grubb as to whether they are willing of which to go along with that. is that in violation of State Question 780? That's the question.
And here's where we've got a problem too, because we've got a prison system that's so remarkably overburdened that on any given day they've got more people than they have beds to house those people. Is this the time to apply a new felony?
That's the question of which our legislature, obviously we do our best of which to do the people's will at the legislature, and if we get the emails in support of this legislation, if the district attorneys contact their local senators and representatives, show them the intent, if this gets publicity in newspapers showing that this is a serious problem that we want to provide a remedy to, then hopefully we can proceed in that direction. This is again an issue of which the legislature and the people of Oklahoma must decide due to the serious nature of this criminal act.
I guess my other concern would be, we know that oftentimes district attorneys they'll put as many charges as possible on, knowing that they can probably work out some type of a plea deal at some point or another. Is there the possibility that hate crimes will be applied, felony hate crimes will be applied, where they may not necessarily rise to the same level as this deal that we saw in Shawnee? Ellen?
Well, there's always that possibility, and I can't control what other DAs do. I am not a fan of stacking charges. I'm not a fan of overcharging. I was the reform candidate when I was elected last year, or I still am. I'm not a candidate now. I'm the reform DA.
You're the guy. You're the dude.
So, you know, while Senator Sharp talks about 780 addressed drug crimes and property crimes. It didn't address violent beatings. I don't think it's the will of the Oklahoma people to allow this type of crime to be inflicted on our citizens. I don't think that's the reputation we want around the nation. I don't think that's the reputation each of us want. I don't think that's any of our intent. I think this has just been a statute that's been overlooked because it probably doesn't get applied very often. You don't hear about racially motivated crimes in Oklahoma to a large extent, and if we had more, which I don't want more, but if we had more, this statute would have been revisited long ago. And it's not to put drug addicts in prison. It's not to put people committing low-level crimes in prison. This statute needs to be amended so that we can put violent offenders with specific intent to target specific groups of people in prison. I can't imagine a situation where the citizens of Oklahoma would argue that we want to let violent people walk the streets of our state. It puts all of us in jeopardy.
And the DA brings up a really good point, Senator. This 780, 781 was specifically designed to keep low-level nonviolent offenders from crowding our prisons. This obviously is not low level and certainly is not nonviolent. This wouldn't apply, would it?
Well, our district attorney definitely brings up the argument that I would present before the Judiciary Committee when I present this legislation. And again, this is one of which the district attorneys and other counties and districts would want to present to their legislators in support of this legislation. And so therefore, I think that's a very valid argument, and I think that it's one of which could very well push this across the threshold.
Talk to me a bit about how that legislation might be worded then, because again, my concern is somebody might say something that might be perceived as racial or homophobic or transphobic or name the phobic. They might say that in the heat of the moment where the attack wasn't necessarily an attack that was a direct result of somebody's physical attributes or sexual preference or race or any number of different factors. How do we make sure that the person is being charged properly and not just saying something heat of the moment?
Well, it would have to be based upon the premise, legal premise upon intimidation. To hear this physical act is not only being done under the intent of which to hurt this individual, but also with the intimidation involved in race, color, creed, sex, religion, whatever which is being involved here, which you can prove that in a court of law. And that's where I think that district attorneys would be hesitant of which just to pile this on without the ability of which to prove. And in this particular case, with the video and clear audio of this hate crime, this is a very obvious hate crime attack.
Could we model it more after the federal legislation?
I think we could. That again would be something that we would want to look at. I would want to get with the district attorneys' councils to see how they would want to word this, so therefore they would be contacting their senator and representative in support of this legislation. As our DA and I discussed on the way up here, legislation is very easy to get through the legislation if the individuals, public and the district attorneys in this particular case, contact their legislators and let them know why this is necessary.
Is that something you think you could run this next session?
Sure, I'd be happy to run it. And I think that that's something which I will run. We've got to get the Judiciary Committee chair of which to hear the bill, and then I've got to be able to present it in such a way of which to convince our Judiciary Committee of which to support it, and then it has to go to the other side of the chamber, which would be in the House in this case, and that would be the same issue, whoever the House author is, to be able to present that to their Judiciary chair on that side.
Mr. Grubb, I'll give you the final sales pitch on this then. If the legislators are listening right now, the governor is listening right now, what do you want them to know?
I want them to know it's important for Oklahoma to appear and be a national model when we have this hate crime happening here, and the physical proof, the videos of what occurred, that we've got to take the national stage and we have to set the standard. We live in a modern era where this type of crime is unacceptable and it's unwarranted, and we have to punish it accordingly. I don't think anybody would disagree with me that these two individuals that seriously beat this man need to go to prison for a long time. He will be healing from this for years, and my heart goes out to the individual.
Well, thanks so much, gentlemen, for joining us, and thank you for joining us. I'm Aaron Brolbeck for Mitchell Talks.